join me in Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. No one in the audience has their hand up for public participation. So we'll move on to the September town meeting articles. So the first one, and I realize I didn't prep you on this, Roger, but does the rec subcommittee have anything to say on Article 3 or the will of Marshall Simons?
So the amount is $74,907.15. This is the second reading of receipts from the will of Marshall Simons. I did contact Brendan. The subcommittee didn't meet. There didn't seem to be a compelling reason to do so. I did ask Brendan what the projects were on the list for this year, and he mentioned that last year they built the treehouse, and they used part of the funds from the Simons Trust for that. Of course, my papers are out of order here. But they have a list. He said they were going back to the list that they had prior to that to continue funding projects at Simons Park from that. And another list. Anyway.
Okay. And did the subcommittee take a vote, or
No.
you went with the assumption it would probably be okay?
I think the full committee can decide on their own whether they're in favor. Oh, actually, I do have the list. The list, potential list anyway, from the rec department for the funds are accessibility improvements on walkways leading to the lower tennis and pickleball courts, potentially additional therapeutic recreation staff, fund for the modular trailer used for the summer therapeutic recreation program, funds for special events, and a scholarship fund for programs in the park.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. Any discussion on this?
Mr. Chairman, motion to approve.
I'll second.
Thank you. All right, and we don't have anyone online yet. Okay. David?
Yes.
Sonia?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Frank?
Yes.
Doug?
Yes.
Cheyenne?
Yes.
Chair votes yes, that's 900. I accidentally skipped our first item, which is where we have sad news that Jennifer Reale has left us as clerk and moving on with her legal career, but the happy news is we have Julie Buckingham joining us, who I'm sure will do an excellent job. So welcome aboard, Julie.
Welcome.
Welcome. All right, there is one other article, not strictly a financial article, but Article 12, which I'll read the salient points here, has to do with hybrid meetings. So the important part here is the town meeting or any public meeting by any board, committee, or department shall be accessible by all who wish to attend, either in person or via an electronic communications platform. This communications platform will allow users to connect via video, audio, phone, and chat using an internet connection and supported device. Members of these meetings shall be able to be recognized by the moderator or chair, and their vote, where applicable, be recorded via the electronic communications platform or to act in any other manner in relation thereto. And while it only refers specifically to boards, committees, or departments, my understanding is it would also apply to subcommittees, but it does not explicitly say that. So what I'd like us to do is, if you all agree, is to discuss and take a position as to the committee part of this. And I don't think we need to discuss, we'll let town meeting deal with whether they want to apply to town meeting. So I would suggest we limit our discussion to whether we think it's appropriate for boards or boards, committees, and subcommittees to essentially be required to have hybrid meetings for any of their meetings. Okay, and we had, Scott Martin had presented to us at a previous meeting regarding the same item. Does anyone have any thoughts on this matter? Cheyenne?
I think it's fine for, committees like ours and larger groups who are meeting in a specific.
You might need to pull your mic up just so people at home.
How about
just
now?
pull it closer.
Closer.
There you go.
Better?
I assume.
All right. So yeah, it's fine for, a meeting like this, to do hybrid or remote access. But subcommittees where there's, 2 or 3 of us meeting at another location, say, I don't know, the fire department or the police station or something else, it might be harder for us to get a remote or hybrid, meeting kind of going. And those are a lot more informal in general to begin with. So.
Okay. Chris Campbell.
Hi everyone. Sorry. And that's actually a perfect example of why I'm in favor of this. I actually do have COVID. I was diagnosed Sunday night, so obviously I'm not with you all. Feeling finally better from it, so I'm able to participate in this meeting. But I foresee that this is going to continue to happen, that we're going to have bouts of sickness and illness. And because we have the ability to remotely join, we can participate in this meeting, even though we can't physically be there. So I think that's the obvious one for me. I will give an example from last year where I had a school event and also I had a school subcommittee meeting. The school event ended at 6:30. The subcommittee started at 6:30. I was able to join from the car for the entire meeting until I could get there in person, which took about 25 minutes. So I didn't miss anything from the school subcommittee meeting when we were going over the budget. I was able to join in person, pick up where we left off, didn't have to ask any clarifying questions. And from there, we've seen greater participation from town meeting members. Yes, there's 1 or 2 or 3 that will join, but they're better informed and they're better a part of the process and they feel better with this open and transparency. So besides the COVID and not being able to join in person, my other point is with all the other commitments we all have, it does create for flexibility for us to be able to continue to do our jobs on these committees, ask the important questions with the budgets, but still maintain our committee's abilities to move forward.
Thanks, Chris. Other questions or comments? Roger?
I guess generally it seems like a good idea, except I wonder a little bit about the burden on the infrastructure on the committees. And in particular, the phrasing here says, all who wish to attend. Can they decide at the last minute? Do they have to decide, 2 days before when the meeting's posted? I guess I'd be concerned that we're going to set up a bunch of infrastructure that will not be used in many cases. And maybe it's a hardship on individuals to more than 2 days in advance to say, yeah, I want to attend, so you need to make it virtual. But otherwise, we're going to burden ourselves and the town, because we're going to have to ask the town to fit up more conference rooms with real facilities to support this. The fact that we have to spend money to support it isn't a bad thing. That's, what we do when there's a need. We fill it. But it's just one other aspect of the whole thing.
It doesn't say explicitly in this article, and at least one of the other articles, this may only be for town meeting, I know it says something about needing to give advance notice, and I think that's something that the chair of the committee could probably require, as opposed to it being a spur-of-the-moment thing, but good point.
I mean, part of it is the interpretation of the wording, is does the chair have any discretion?
Yes, fair point.
That's all I got.
Okay. Rob?
Being chair of the library trustees, we can have hybrid meetings anytime we want because we have the infrastructure to do it. And we've had it where people have gone away and have been able to access the meeting from a hotel room or a cruise ship one time. And Today's world, most people are still working remotely, and more people are used to this. Where I used to work, we had remote meetings from all over the world every single day. I think it's going to be something that's going to be more and more prevalent everywhere. The only problem I have with it is, like Roger said, that the subcommittees and all the different things. I mean, we have a 2-person budget committee, and then it meets at 9 o'clock in the morning, on a Tuesday. We don't think that we need to have a hybrid meeting set up just for that. If they added this just for full committees, I would totally support it, but subcommittees, it's really hard. I don't know how you guys would do it for Town Hall 1 and Recreation Department.
Okay.
That's it.
Right, and again, the wording just says committees, and I'm strictly going from previous discussions where the implication was that subcommittees were intended to be covered by this, but I'm not sure how it would be interpreted.
Go ahead.
Sonia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we discussed this before. I know when it was presented to us, I don't think my position's really changed on it in that, to reiterate, I think what people have said, I absolutely have no issue if town meeting at their will wanted to do that within town meeting, or if we're saying meetings like this where we can easily do that. A subcommittee meeting to me is near impossible to be able to traffic all of that. I think we post those meetings because that way people can know, and really there's no vote that's happening at a subcommittee meeting that isn't then going to come to a full board to be discussed again. So if it's about it being before Ways and Means or before town meeting or a select board or any other board, then sure. But as long as there's the word committee in there, it's hard to leave that. For me, you're leaving it at the discretion of how it's read. And we can just talk about what's happening in a budget session here. There are just far too many subcommittee meetings for us to logistically think about, has it been posted and do we have access to it, when they can certainly either come to the meeting, send their thoughts, because there'll be no formal vote taken there that's not taken by the full committee. So, I think that's what we discussed before. I'm not sure. I went back to try to figure out. I'm not sure that this wording has changed very much. I think they took the word sub out and just left it as committee, if I remember it correctly. But my fear is that that's up for a discretionary thought on whether or not that means subcommittees or not. And I just don't think subcommittees need to fall in that order. I mean, I've been doing this for a number of years, I don't know, a lot of them, and I've gone to a lot of subcommittee meetings, and truthfully, it has been rare. I could probably count on one hand people who've wanted to join us at subcommittee meetings. So my fear is that we're going to go an extra step at the subcommittee level when, it's been said a few times now, we're either meeting at 7 a.m., 9 in the afternoon. There's just all these different time frames. I would prefer to do what we've always done, which is post it as a public meeting. And if the will of town meeting is to pass that, boards in their entirety in town meeting have that access, I understand that. But at a subcommittee level, I just can't see that as happening in my mind.
Okay. Anything else? David?
So I'd vote against it just for what Sonia said, because it is unclear. So I think it should be clarified, and I agree with the subcommittee. I'm not sure that I'm also in favor of it during the bigger meetings. I certainly know that, and this is maybe an unpopular view, the world has changed, and the work life has certainly involved more Zoom meetings and other meetings. And we'll find out in the long term if that's good, or maybe it's bad. I think you lose a lot. I think the town meetings and other meetings that we've had that were purely virtual, I don't think it's as good a discussion. I don't think it's as good a debate. I think it's sometimes technologically wise, it's hard to communicate in that environment, and I think that takes away from discussions. So you miss a lot of the, I don't know, someone has a question, they may be more hesitant in a big forum where they're online versus other people being in the audience. So again, I understand the world has changed, and again, I wouldn't be totally disappointed if it's voted to do it during the bigger meetings. I think I'd prefer no.
Chris, is your hand up from before, or is this a new hand?
New hand.
New hand, okay. Go ahead.
I don't necessarily disagree with what was just said, because I honestly, personally expected with, a 4-year-old and then now an 8-month-old, and when we started last budget season, had brand new baby, I expected to be a lot more virtual than I was. But I think you have to let the members also decide that, because I agree the nuance of the in-person meetings is important, and especially for this conversation, I absolutely wanted to be there in person to have this conversation, but obviously can't. And I think that that's how town meeting has to evolve, and town meeting needs to decide these things, and then we need to decide them as committees. But even with those options, many of our members still have chosen the majority be in person, because that's where a lot of the really good work is done. The option there is what allows for accessibility, allows for young parents to be able to join committees, allows for disabled people who can't physically get there, low economic. It opens up the community for more accessibility. I think the important question here that we don't know is the ruling of subcommittee versus committee. And I think if legal counsel could weigh in here, that would be really important for, and I know we can't get it right now, but important for our discussion, because it seems like there's two different of no or no just for subcommittee. And I think that it's an important distinction on how this conversation could go.
Okay, fair point. Rob?
Just exactly what financial thing are we voting on?
So this is Article 12, and the only reason I put on here, even though it's not a financial article, it does affect our committee and potentially our subcommittees. So that's why I thought we might like to take a position as to whether we're in favor of this or not, from a committee point of view, not worrying about town meeting.
Okay.
So people think it's reasonable to take a position. We don't have to.
I think it's reasonable. It affects, it's specifically about committees. I think they should all take it.
Okay. Ed?
I think it'd be a lot more reasonable if we had a financial impact calculated to vote on. I would also just like to respond briefly to the idea that people are more hesitant to comment online. I know more people who are more hesitant to comment in person. I think the public in-person meeting can be very intimidating. I think it takes all kinds, and one of our biggest problems is getting more participation. So I'm almost willing to vote, on that basis alone, and we'll work out the details later.
Okay. All right. If we'd like to take a position, we can have a motion.
So, point of clarification,
Or is there
Mr.
more?
Chairman. So are you asking us to take a position relative to Ways and Means?
Yes.
Or relative, because, the big implication is town meeting.
Yes, and I don't think we need, I don't think it makes sense for us to take a position for town meeting, because that's for town meeting to decide. This is strictly from because we're a committee that would be affected by this, do we think this is a good thing for our committee or not?
So maybe I could offer a motion. The members of the Ways and Means Committee support the idea of hybrid meetings for Ways and Means.
Okay, and in
is that
particular,
specific enough?
required hybrid meetings. We can obviously still have them.
Yes, right, sorry.
Yeah.
But not subcommittees.
I would stipulate that in the motion, yes.
Okay.
Are we,
Point of clarification.
Yeah?
So have other boards taken a position on Article 12 select board, who's the oversight, was the other ones that normally do?
I don't know if anyone else take a position.
Okay.
Besides the zoning bylaw committee.
They obviously are in favor, presumably. Yes.
I'm also, yeah.
I know we're leaning towards the no, but that is, what we're saying is that, are we requiring that the Ways and Means Committee would not have some at the discretion of the subcommittee meetings that could be virtual? Or are we leaving it up to the discretion of the subcommittee?
Well, I think the motion is, see if I
I just want to
paraphrase-
clarify this, yes.
Just to make sure we say the same thing. I think the motion is Ways and Means supports Article 12 if it applies to just the full committee and not subcommittees.
Right, as applied to the full committee and not subcommittee.
That's the motion you're making.
Yes.
Okay, so we're not restricting it, we're just saying that we don't want that particular required apply
We're saying
to
that's our
subcommittee.
interpretation that we're voting on.
I see.
If that's the wrong interpretation, then we vote on something that doesn't apply.
I don't want to complicate this, but my question is, I mean, you're going to get up, I assume, Mr. Chairman, at town meeting then and say that
Have to
Ways and Means did not take a position on Article 12, but would like to let you know that we took a vote regarding Ways and Means. Because the vote that's being moved forward is really not it's not a position on Article 12 then.
We're taking a position on Article 12 as it applies to committees in particular.
Committees,
But
in particular, Ways and Means Committee.
Ways and Means in particular.
Ways and Means, right. So
Big
my
decision.
fear is that not fear, I mean, the world's not going to end.
And I'll make it clear,
but-
we're not taking a position as it applies to town meeting.
Or any other board,
Or any
really.
other board.
We're just, because I think the important part here is if you just stand up, I don't mean you, but you meaning us, and stand up and say
mean me,
Ways
I
and Means took a vote, then really what ends up happening is, it's a very clear point that we're making. I think a lot of us are saying somewhat of the same thing, which is we're open to having somebody, virtually at Ways and Means. I'm
However,
so
our vote turns
adamantly
out, I think I
opposed.
can make it clear what we're voting on. And
Okay, I'm just making sure.
yep, I think that's fair.
Because
But yes, we do need to be clear on that.
No,
I agree.
because it's important, because I think a subcommittee, I really do think that would be a logistical nightmare.
Yep.
I do.
Yeah, Roger.
So I'm glad to hear so far there hasn't been a second. I'd be happy to withdraw it.
We're getting there, hold on.
One comment is, in terms of the debate at town meeting, will our sort of voluntary motion or opinion cloud the issue from town meeting's point of view? And maybe that's a good thing, depending on what strategy side you're on, or if we just are silent until there is debate, and we can certainly chime in during the debate.
Well, I think, and I looked into backup and there was no clarification. If they want to clarify that it does or doesn't apply to subcommittees at that point, they certainly can.
Okay.
I have no idea.
And presumably they would try to clarify that.
Right. Also, in our crafting of the motion, I don't know whether we are crafting it in a way in which we can more likely to approve it compared to if we were voting on Article 12 more broadly, where I suspect we would probably not so readily approve it. Fewer of us would approve it.
Well, I don't think we're crafting a motion. We're just describing a position as it applies to our committee in particular.
Okay, well, we're making a motion, then we're going to vote on it, right?
Yes.
So in fact.
Oh, I'm sorry,
I made
this
a
motion, yes.
This motion, I made a motion and you
Yeah.
clarified, and I'm fine with that. Okay.
Very good. Does anyone want to second this motion now that we think we understand what we're voting on?
I don't think so. Yeah.
I think we should leave it alone.
Can we,
Or we can leave it alone?
Okay,
if you don't,
I'll take it back.
No, you
don't have to take it back.
I don't have to, right.
We'll just let it die on the vine.
You've been taken aback.
the only reason, if I can, Mr. Chairman, it's not, I think what you're doing is in good intent. The problem is I think it's going to confuse the issue even more. And at that point, the questions will start to be, did other boards take a position as it applies to them? And then more importantly, if I am voting on the article, I personally believe that if this article were to move forward, the word committee should be struck completely. Like, there should be an amendment on the floor of town meeting removing the word committee and saying either it's elected boards, appointed boards, but no subcommittees. Like, I think their language is a bit too vague on it, which is, I believe, what we had talked about when they were here before us. So
All right, how about
maybe
we
we'll let it go.
we'll leave it up to individuals to say whatever they will at town meeting. That sounds great.
Based on past precedents, they usually do.
Yes, don't be shy.
All right, thank you for the discussion.
I'm glad we had it.
Gave it the college try.
All right. I don't believe there's any other articles that need to be discussed, but I put in other articles just in case I missed one. Does anyone have anything else that they think applies to us? I don't believe there's anything else.
Oh, sorry, just one point of information.
Yes.
The domain of Ways and Means covers not just money, but anything else we want.
I understand.
Okay.
And appreciate that fact.
I like that expansive reading.
What it says in the bylaws.
Anything else we want, that's a...
Not literally.
Probably put in flowery words.
Well, if that's the case, should we amend it to say so?
I don't want to spend that time with the
Yeah.
review committee.
All right, moving on, because the administration has been extremely patient listening to us yak. The next item is Town Hall 1 has been working with the administration regarding, as you know, a bunch of large projects coming up, how we would do the debt scheduling, the concept of financial dashboard came up during that. There's a draft version of that you all have a copy of in front of you. So Town Hall 1, would you like to give us an update on where that all stands?
Okay.
He's been taking the lead, so
Frank, go for it.
continue to pass.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a little bit of context. So back in April, the administration, as part of our Ways and Means budget planning, puts up a dashboard, they did one in April, of the debt schedule and capital projects. So that's kind of the backdrop of this, and we could even, I don't know if you've got it, John?
I sent it to John because my computer was dead.
Oh.
I sent you an email in case we want to.
So if you can just throw that up while I'm yakking here, John, that would be good, because you know all about this. So that set the stage in conjunction
I'm
with
going
the
to give it to
fact
you.
Email it to me.
Yeah, I'm just going to forward it.
That there's a lot of deliberations going on capital projects, and several members of this committee have expressed either concerns or ideas about how to get through that whole process better. Ed made the point many times, we need better plans and more planning around capital projects, about the impact of them. Roger's done some work with the committee. John did a derivation of the tax impact of different school options. So we've been dabbling with this thing for a while. And that's morphed into, maybe we just need an upgrade to the dashboard that includes quite a bit more in terms of the levy limit, tax impact from projects, and in fact, we even need to layer into it a more accurate capital plan than we had in May. I met with Mark Woods of the Capital Budget Committee twice, actually, and approached him on, do you agree that we could do an update to this thing and that we actually we're in a new age, right? I mean, there's a hell of a lot going on infrastructure potential and actuals that are coming very quickly. So we need to get the capital plans really scrubbed up as best we can, roll that into the debt schedule, and behind the debt schedule, put up a dashboard that includes more information about costs, average taxpayer costs for the debt, the impact on the operating budget itself, where's the levy going. And so we had 2 Town Hall 1 subcommittee meetings, which are pretty big. There were a lot of people at them. And we had 3 topics we wanted to discuss. An upgrade to the dashboard that gave this more comprehensive picture of where's the world been. We wanted to look back, where's the world going, and How does that relate to the capital budget? We then talked about an update to the capital budget plan somewhat in committee with Mark Woods, and hopefully we can pursue that. And aligned with that, we know that the police station planning is pretty far along, and we also know that the school projects, at least one of them is very far along, which is an elementary school, and they have also kicked off a high school a committee, and they're going to go out and hire a project manager for that, and they'll begin to start to review in quite a bit of detail over the next year, just where are we going with that. So with all of that going on, the capital budget plan can become more meaningful. If we upgrade the dashboard, that can layer into that in a way that we can extract pretty rapidly information about impacts if we went this way, if we went that way, if the spacing was this, if the price became that, and you can see what's going on. So which eye chart is this one?
This
That's the old one, right?
is the old one.
If you can make that just a touch bigger, there we go, and student body right.
I'm doing my best.
Okay, you want to just go up there and grab it?
I know, right?
I might.
Well, I kind of put you on the spot, Doug. Well, in any
Trying to
event,
grab it.
so we all have this in your notes from April.
So this, just to be clear, this is the debt memo that administration gave us during budget season.
Budget season, last April, it was published in April, we used it April and May. And it was also backstopped by the capital budget plan at that time, which is actually published in your handout for the May town meeting, but it's pretty out of date. So what's happened since then? We took this pretty seriously, and a lot of people have participated. I'm only talking because I guess only one person should try to lay this out for you. But we came up with a pro forma, what would a bigger dashboard look like? What would it have in it? And we didn't plug in the actual numbers, but we kind of gave a template of what all the rows could be. And John, and I don't know if anyone helped you with it, John, but he's done a ton of work on this over the past several days to build out an example, probably a work in progress of what a new dashboard would look like. And you've got that in front of you, and I seriously doubt that that'll display any better. So for the public, they're at a disadvantage. But if you look at this, what you'll see is we've expanded quite a bit. So there's a bunch of operating budget stuff, percentages of the budget that the debt service represents. We've got levy limit, tax levy, excess capacity. The reason that that's come into play is if we were to literally do everything quickly, if we were to literally do Fox Hill, the high school quickly, and the police station quickly, we will eat up our levy capacity for sure. So we began to get some concern about what do we need to do with managing a levy limit, and that leads to the question of do we need a debt exclusion in order to protect it, which we'll get into later. So we asked to do an update to the dashboard. John has done a tremendous job on a big pass at that. Second thing we asked is for capital budget to engage more deeply and republish the capital plan as best they could for all the known projects that have changed quite a bit since it was published last April, and then to sort of periodically engage with the departments and the committees as they move along on new things, like the high school building committee. If the administration has any changes to things that they want to do on capital projects that are a little further out, we can make that more current. And if you layer these two things together, what you get is a real clear picture of your operating budget and your taxes and of what the capital projects do to the debt schedule. And it becomes more accurate, more complete, and gives us a better handle on how to understand this. We also added what I call thumbnails, and John's taken a pass at that at the very bottom. the average tax impact for every $1 million on the levy. Now, we've computed this before. I think somebody came up, John, I think you did it once. And so we want to put that right on the base of the dashboard, a thumbnail, a metric. We also asked to add the average tax impact for every $1 million that we add to the bond. So if somebody's getting this notion that they want to do a $50 million dog pound, well, we can say $50 million with it being bonded starting in year 2030. That'll be 50 times $3.30 that'll go to every year of the life of the bond on the schedule. So you can see how very quickly you can start to get a handle on, for any of these brilliant ideas that somebody has or some project that they're trying to launch, what's it likely to do to the taxpayer, really. And then the last one on here is new growth. New growth is important. We're all kind of aware of this, but we don't really talk about it much. And I know the administration looks at it constantly. The way the tax laws work, it's really governed very substantially by how much growth your town has of its total asset value in property year on year. So if you're a growth community, then you could continue to, raise more money from raise and appropriate, and you stay, kind of out of the woods from 2.5. If you're a low-growth community or you're a very high-spend community, then you very quickly get into the funnel of you need to slow down, or you need to get exclusions, that sort of thing. So I thought it was nice to put new growth on here, which John has taken a whack at. And there are a couple of other things, John, I don't know if you'll be able to get to it, and I'm going to turn this over to you guys, because you've really done a ton of work on this. We sort of systematically ignore, we always think about what's the impact to the taxpayer, the average taxpayer impact when we spend X more dollars. What does it do to them? Well, the average is great. There's two other factors that I think need to be thought about, and maybe we can do something with that. One is small businesses. The small businesses, in terms of the footage that they lease and pay taxes on, or the rent, which gets passed along to somebody at some point, has to turn up in a tax for the property, the commercial property. And we really need to be more careful, I believe, personally, on the impacts of some of these big things that are coming up on the small businesses. And I honestly don't have a real good feel for it, but I think there could be more impact than we're aware of, and that should enter into our discussions. So I thought it'd be nice if we could get a little bit of dashboard material on that. There was one other thing. The other thing is guideposts. We've talked a little bit about what should the guideposts be for how big should we let stabilization get. You can pour money into stabilization till the cows come home and basically be cash rich and operating budget poor because you've got it all stuck in your stabilization. So at some point, we should have an idea of when is it big enough, what's enough money in stabilization. And I thought it would be good to get a guidepost for that. And there are formulas you could come up with. It could be a percent of your operating budget. It could be based on how much free cash you've already got, how's your operating budget looking, and what's your growth rates. So we haven't published that at this point, right, John?
Right.
But we're thinking about that very seriously. A guidepost for stabilization, a guidepost for how much debt we should have in any given year. And so as you would roll out your debt, and as you see it going up, you can get some idea of whether or not you're starting to get way over the guidepost, or the guideline it will grow, whether you're staying in those bounds. And I think that would give us a better body of logic to base our feelings on. It's too expensive, or we can do it, or we can't do it, or maybe we can do it, but. And you like to know that as you start to wrap your head around how you feel about a project. And I know, Ed, you've thought about this stuff quite a bit. We haven't had a chance to talk to you too much on it, but that's the sort of thing that we're up to here. I think we should let Paul and John talk about what they've put in front of us a little bit, and then maybe open it up for some discussion. Is that fair enough, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely. Yeah. Would you guys like to answer that? Or?
Yeah, thanks. I think Frank hit the nail on the head, that we all kind of got in a room and tried to say, how can we summarize the details that we use in our planning documents, several different documents, to put them on a sort of a one-sheeter. 10 years is probably too much, but I don't know if we made it any easier to see on this, but this is the first pass at it. But what is the type of information that would be helpful? Obviously, there's lots more information that would be helpful, but this was sort of the first pass at the top level stuff that we normally talk about, and, trying to link them from the other documents we worked. I talked to John Eiler, who appreciates the rabbit holes I went down, trying to merge all these documents and to save 1 minute. But this isn't meant to be final. It's important to point out, if you do look at the numbers on here, keep in mind this does not include a police station, any money for a police station or any money for school buildings. We took it out so that it wouldn't skew the numbers up and then have to add them in. If you remember, the numbers that we had were unescalated and undervalued when we were talking in the spring, and sort of the amounts we're talking about now for any of these projects blow away what we had in our plan. So, there were placeholders in the plan, but they weren't anywhere near what we currently need. So
the takeaway on this is a model. It's the numeric values that are in here don't reflect probably a lot of the information that we have today, and can add to this in terms of the capital projects we know about. Correct?
Yeah,
Right.
so the
next pass.
Yeah, so we'll be able to fine tune. The operating budget stuff is from our projection, which we update constantly. It only goes out five years. That's why you'll notice the different colors, because this came from a source document. This didn't. This was just rolling over formulas. But we can dig deeper, and the debt plan came from our existing debt plan.
Yeah, so it's the debt where we've got to really do some work.
Yeah, and the non-bonded capital stuff, the stuff at the bottom, if we're trying to say, all right, let's talk about the operating budget, what the debt plan does to that, and then what's not in the debt plan, but is still our pay-as-you-go capital plan that we talk about, the non-bonded stuff. So that needs to be some fine-tuning too, because that's the kind of pull-out, all this rest of the stuff on that pull-out plan that's in your budget book that changes year to year. There's stuff that gets funded that never really made it on that report years before. But now if capital is doing a deeper dive into stuff and we're trying to make a more useful document, then hopefully that will continue to improve, and we can fine-tune whatever winds up on whatever version of a dashboard.
Companion documents.
So let me just throw a few things in here. First off, thanks for all the work on this. This is, I think, going to be really helpful going forward, that we're all working off the same playbook with the numbers. I think I'll thank the school building committee for forcing us to think about this a little bit more and come up with these metrics, because I don't think we have until recently. A few things came out to me that, so just in terms of going forward, John will work on this to make the numbers more accurate and real. And I think the intent is that there would be probably a second page that would give the individual line items, so that we could see how do the various current and proposed projects roll up into these existing debt service and proposed debt service numbers, so we can see what does a potential police station look like in terms of the bonding, what does an elementary school of type 3 versus type 6 end up looking like. And so I think one thing that's different here from what we've seen in previous debt memos is it's maybe a little clearer what's proposed and what's existing, so we can get a sense of that and see what the what-ifs are. As Frank said, I think we're trying to come up with a good metric for business impact. It's really hard to figure out what the right categories are there, but the intent is we have that residential tax rate impact, but we don't have that similar number of, okay, we know $1 million on the operating budget implies certain things to the average resident. What does it mean to a business of type X? So I think we want to get that here. So because, as we know, they're paying a larger burden. One other thing I'll I'll point out that going through this analysis, and you can see it here, and I don't think I appreciated this until recently, is the excess levy capacity has been a really large number recently. It's sort of in this 11 to $13 million range of excess capacity. And what wasn't obvious to me, but this highlights, is when you model it out, if you factor it, because our operating budget is increasing at 4.3% or something a year, something on that order, and our Proposition 2.5 only goes up at 2.5, and you have your new growth added in, because our operating budget is increasing faster than the levy limit is, those lines obviously cross at some point, and it turns out it's only 5 years off. So it's a lot sooner than you might expect that we eat up that levy capacity, and if nothing else changes, and there's a million variables here, that would imply that that could require a 2.5 override just to meet the operating budget. So that's a useful discussion in the context of all these large projects coming up, in that if you look at the debt service per year on, take the $100 million school, you could fund that from the excess levy capacity, but then that point of 5 years off where you run out of capacity becomes much sooner, which is troublesome, obviously. So I think that drives home the point of why it could make good sense to require a debt override for any of the large projects coming up from a financial point of view, so as not to use that excess capacity too soon. From a political point of view, there's a whole different discussion as to whether that's the right thing to do or not, and we'll let everyone haggle that out from a political point of view. From a strictly financial point of view, that's the analysis that needs to be made to understand that you're trading off when do you want to do a potential 2.5 override on the operating budget versus how unpleasant is it or difficult is it going to be to do a debt override in the near term for these large projects.
Exclusion.
Exclusion.
I'm sorry, exclusion, yes. Yes, I'm sorry, I need to use proper terminology. Debt exclusion, thank you. All right, so anyway, I just wanted to point out a few of those things that stood out to me. Yeah, Sonny.
So a comment and I guess a question. First of all, Frank, I think you're 100% right, and I know, Mr. Chairman, you reiterated that. It'd be great to see the business impact as well, because I think we're challenged with a number of things, not only on the small business side, but I think on some of the larger property owners and where people aren't doing business the same way as they used to. There's some vacant office space. What does that look like for us? And I guess I'll roll that into the next question. Paul or John, when you talk new growth, and I'm embarrassed because I should know this, does that then get offset by if there are vacancies or abatements that are put in, like when a new growth calculation comes in?
No, that would basically be a calculation of new construction that results in new tax dollars, whether it's a deck on somebody's house.
Yes.
Or whether it's a life science laboratory.
Okay, so the two don't meet,
New growth,
really?
not so much. The vacancy rates and things of that nature would be taken into account when determining the valuations of the commercial properties. So
Okay.
that's where it would impact us on the value side. And as we know, our taxation system here in Burlington has benefited from the relative share of the tax of the value in town between commercial and
Yes.
residential. So if commercial starts to
Lag.
decrease or stabilize, or it has an impact on the residential side, because the residential side picks up.
Yeah, we've always, yes, thank you. So we've always kind of prided ourselves on not even hitting the levy by any stretch of the imagination. And this, when you start looking at this chart, you're really not that far, as you said, from where it's starting to get a little nerve-wracking, right? And I think these are the conversations that we've had at Ways and Means for multiple years, where we have never had to have those conversations about cutting budgets. We're always talking about what the percentage increase could be or should be. We've never had to deal with headcounts as far as we've talked about maintaining certain headcounts, but we've never talked about actually having to lay off people. So I have to admit that it's a little shocking to see how quickly that deteriorates, right? And in my opinion, it's what we've always touted as making Burlington unique, is that we haven't had that 2.5%. We haven't had to stick to 2.5% really for the increase of the budget. So I don't know what the exact right answer is, of course, to that, but what I do know is there is a moment in time where you're either up against it and you have levy capacity, but then you're increasing. There was a year that we did 22%, I think, which was ugly to deliver to the residential base, for the tax increase. So I don't know, when you start adding all of these in the projects for the capital budget, are we talking about, and maybe we don't have an answer for this yet, are we talking about putting in one and doing a debt exclusion on another? Are we talking about massaging them all through?
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. This is just a model where when you put numbers in, you can extract ideas and information.
Yes.
There's been no decisions made about what's going to hit when and where, and even how much some of these things would be. But we know that at least some projects are coming, and we know that we need to have a better idea of all these numbers. So this is a way to get more information. I have no idea what will hit when, what we'll do debt exclusions on or not. That's all yet to be determined. We don't even know what big projects would come after the two that we're kind of anticipating, what the timing would be. And timing is everything in this, let alone how much it is, because, your growth can catch up, and your 2.5 laws allow you time. In other words, it has an annual clock to it as well. So I don't think we should draw too many conclusions from what you might think you see here today. That'd be my interpretation.
I just want to clarify on new growth, the number. So, as you know, we're conservative in our projections, and we use a $1.5 million of new growth as our conservative number. I would say that what's kept us from bumping up against the levy is, we have better years than that. I think within my tenure here of about 18 years, we had our all-time high was probably $3.7 million in new growth. And $3 million we would consider a good year, and that would be double what our estimate would be for that, because obviously it's impossible to estimate what somebody's going to build 3 years from now. But more likely we're in the $2 million range, so slightly better than the $1.5 million. And again, it remains to be seen sort of what happens on the commercial side in particular. I mean, it takes a lot of decks and additions on homes to sort of make up for office building, new office building construction and things of that nature. Those are the things that really give us a boost and have sort of been the reason why, we're able, that excess capacity exists. Excess capacity at one time earlier on in my career, we were down to less than $2 million. So it sort of fluctuates with economic conditions, and again, it would not be unusual. We were close at that time to becoming any other town that was bumping up against Prop 2.5. But subsequent years, we obviously had some very positive developments and things going on in town that sort of give us some separation there. But whether you use 1.5 or 2 million or 3 million, we sort of get to that point that John talked about, whether it's 5 years or it's 7 years. We get there just based upon Prop 2.5, the way it works, and what we're funding our operating budgets with.
Right, I think that's an important, for me, I think that's a legitimate conclusion, and I agree we shouldn't jump to too many conclusions yet. But I think one conclusion it is pretty valid is that, yeah, maybe we're talking 5 years, maybe it's more if, it's $2 million a year. But it's, it's not 10 years from now. Again, that's assuming we continue growing the operating budget at the current rate and other things happen at the current rate. So one might conclude from that growing the operating budget by over 4% a year probably isn't sustainable. Or maybe the town wants to pay for that, we'll see. But the point is there's definitely a discussion to be had there. And I think, probably by our next meeting, which may not be until December with January town meeting, but I would think we'll have more detail on these proposed projects, and we can see, okay, if you layer them in on these proposed years, this is what it's going to look like, and we can make a recommendation from a financial point of view if it makes sense to do exclusions or to delay projects or do them all now or whatever. So what other questions might folks have? Ed?
So first, ground rules, which I think is your decision as the chair of the meeting. I could spend an hour or two with you guys just clarifying the assumptions here, which we probably don't want to do here. But I would want to do.
Ground rule one, under an hour.
So I'll try to go with big picture. So first, language. I'm willing to learn a new language if we want, but I don't see a dashboard here. I see a projection, right? And so what's important, what I would call a dashboard, is the box with all the assumptions that go into it, and then maybe summary metrics that come out of it. So are we calling a projection a dashboard, or are we not clear on what?
We can call it whatever we want. I think the dashboard came up in concept because well, it'll ultimately be 2 pages, but one page gives you a good summary, like a dashboard, of here's what we think will happen, here's some interesting metrics in the thumbnails. I think the part of the intent is when we do, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the intent here is that when we have our various discussions about we're making a police station of X million dollars, what does that mean in terms of taxes? We can look here and say, okay, here's based on our analysis that we all kind of agreed to at one point or another, or town hall one agreed to, or some reasonable subset of people agreed to. This is what it costs per million. It gives us. We aren't all just making up our own spreadsheets and coming up with different numbers. So, if you have a better name in dashboard,
Well,
certainly.
I think what we have is the baseline projection.
Yes, these are summaries from our other projections.
Yeah. So
You're right.
what's important, so what I was kicking and screaming about is what I would do to try to attack the problem we have of deciding how many capital projects we can possibly take on, is to acknowledge that the baseline debt schedule that feeds into this is probably wrong, because a lot of the costs for what we intend to take on are too small. And so we're going to have to move or right size or change the nature of some of those. So what I would do is do the baseline projection, so we all say this is more like what's real, and then strip out all the new debt.
Yep, so that does not include any of the projects.
There's no debt so the total budget here doesn't include debt service?
Just doesn't include those 4 buildings that we're talking about building over the next 20 years, say.
Okay, so it takes out the 27 million for Fox Hill School.
Yep.
And the 50, okay, so we want to clarify that.
So this was a shot at creating the baseline before that stuff gets layered in.
Okay, so not even including a lot of what we've been showing on our 10-year debt plan.
Including just those, so we had a placeholder for a police station.
Yeah.
Out, we had a placeholder, a couple different placeholders for Fox Hill School, 27 and 13, out. We had a $40 million placeholder for something at the high school, out.
Okay.
And then 21 years from now, we had something for Pine Glen. Oh,
Okay, so,
it's not gonna show up on here, but.
so I guess what that means is that even excluding projects that we had intended to do and probably hadn't earmarked enough money for, we're kind of getting tight here. So if we add anything, we're getting very tight. So that, I mean, that's big news that has been buried, year on year. So that's why we're here. So I think then this is a good baseline projection, and then what, I'd like the Excel rather than the PDF, right? Because we can quite easily have the chart, which is the debt schedule, and as we get a new estimate for a building, just pop it in. It's really simple to calculate what I assume the duration is 25 years and 5% is the assumed rate of interest. Boom, there's a payment schedule, and that feeds into this, and then we can see quite directly when we're in trouble. And then, like Lego pieces, we can just move those projects around and see what.
That's exactly the idea, right?
That's what John's been doing.
Yeah.
And that's the next iteration will have that level of detail.
Yeah.
So I guess one question I would ask of people is, and I realize you only had a day to look at this, but
An hour.
or an hour. Take a look at this and see, does this give the kind of information, again, assuming that there's a second page with the detailed proposed and existing projects, does that have the sort of information that you all would like to see when we have a meeting and discuss, hey, what sort of big projects, what is the implication of doing various large projects, and what do we think is fiscally responsible? Does this have the information you would need to have that discussion, or is there something else that you would like to see on here that, gee, if only I knew this, it would affect, what I'm thinking. So, yeah.
So using Frank's terminology, the guideposts, sort of where we want, what level of debt we're willing to tolerate, and where we want the stabilization fund to end up.
Yes,
They
those
sort
are
of
two specific
set upper
formulas.
limits by policy about where we want things to be.
Yep.
And then, we have free cash, and we're going to have to spend it on capital projects. So that a little bit offsets some of the things. But we can't say much of anything about future free cash, other than we hope it keeps coming. And that depends a lot on local receipts, which are estimates and also hard to predict based on the economy. But I think the guideposts in terms of tolerable levels of debt and how much money we want in the stabilization fund are the pieces that are not currently adopted.
I would agree. I think they'll do that, too. And John actually offered up a formula. He and I had a little argument over it. And I want a beer, but I don't think either one of us are going to survive what they'll do with it.
Frank was correct, I would like to admit.
But, the guideposts. And I'd also add one other thing, if I may. One thing I would like to see, and somebody did it at one point recently, was the tax increase per 1,000 of your assessment. So a residential, anybody could say, well, I'm assessed $900,000 for my house. What's my tax increase going to be? And I think that's a pretty useful metric.
Yeah, I think you can see the word link, and it's underlined. That's the link to the tool.
Click on the link.
Yeah.
Put in whatever number, and then it spits out the residential on one side and the commercial on the other side, based on our current values and shift and everything.
So you could plug in your own value in there?
And it shows you every 50,000.
Now I know. I understand the rabbit holes you were going down now. I think that would be pretty handy, because the problem with median numbers is theoretically there's, like 2 people that are at the median, right, or 1, and everything else is above or below. And I think that would be good to know. And the other thing that I think would be really good is, I think a policy on stabilization is actually pretty fundamental. I'm making an assumption, and this is myself, that stabilization should never be used for anything unless you've got an unstable scenario on your hands. Now, one thing you could use it for is if you said, well, I really want to start this project here, and it really pushes me over my guideposts for the percent of debt for a couple of years. And you could say, but I know that things will calm down, so it's a bubble. And maybe I could say, I could use some stabilization to lower the bubble. That kind of thinking, but unless we know where we want it to be, I think everybody's afraid to take anything out of it, and I think we probably don't know how much we should be putting into it. That does bother me actually a lot. And the other point I want to make related to that is free cash policy. I think that we deal with every year with the administration and with the financial teams on, you got to remember, free cash is accumulated taxpayer money that's just sitting there. So is stabilization, but for a reason. You want to have it to not get in trouble. Free cash, what do we do with it other than the small, relatively small bonding, infrastructure projects that we do annually? But we never use up more than, on each side of the house, we use a couple $1 million, right? Of free cash, something like that.
It says 750, 7.5.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we've used we've split 3.5 million, 5 million.
Yeah, so 2 million on
4.8
each side.
million.
So that's...
And there's other warrant articles that'll come out of free cash.
Yeah, so that's something we probably will continue to just work on as a committee, as long as we've got that size kitty. It might be helpful on dealing with a project that's a little tight. Another thing you could do is you could plan, I'm thinking out loud just to scout.
Actually, Paul wanted to get a word in edgewise
sorry,
about
go
10
ahead.
hours ago.
I just wanted to point out, and I forget whose statement it said, I think it was during the discussion about the goalposts. The future capital projects for the town aren't going to fit in the operating budget, okay? But that is not unique. That is every other community in the state uses a debt exclusion to fund a capital project. Our blessing has been over the years, and maybe part of it was, I know that when I got here 18 years ago, the debt was really low. So I think the town had not been investing in the infrastructure for quite a while. So the operating budgets were doing well because debt was such a small portion of it. We're getting back to normal levels of investment for, a community of our size, but, it really is not a unique situation. This is how communities fund buildings, is through debt exclusions. And there may be a couple, maybe a Wellesley or something like that out there that may be able to accommodate a new building within their general operating budget guidelines, but that is few and far between. And, I think we've gotten away with it for quite a while. And in the 18 years that I've been here, I think we've done a lot of capital projects to get caught up. And, I just want to, we may need to just sort of change that mindset that somehow everything just sort of fits in here because it's, again, I live in Stoneham, which is a much less blessed financial community, and that they approved a new high school and it's being built right now. This is how capital projects of the magnitude of these projects are funded sort of outside the operating budget. The operating budgets get held harmless because we're taking the debt outside of that. So I don't want people to feel bad about that. It's very actually normal within the state of Massachusetts, and that's how all buildings get built of any significant size. Again, we've been very blessed. I hope that we continue to be blessed with our financial position, but it's really more of a miracle that we haven't gotten to this position sooner. But again, I think we were coming from a situation where our debt was so low and that it appeared to be no real major investments over a long period of time. And I mean, we could go back and list out the projects. We've accomplished quite a bit in terms of investing into the community to catch up. And now we're just more in line with what a normal community would have to do is sort of handle these things outside of, the tax levy and Prop 2.5 limits. And that's generally how it's done. And, I like the mentality to try to keep it the way we do it, but I just don't want people to start thinking like there's a big failure going on. This is just where, we're getting to that point now where we have to sort of, and due to the magnitude of these numbers, what was the Harold Wyman, John, the cost of that?
32 million.
So that Harold Wyman on Wyman Street in Woburn, 4 years ago, before the pandemic, was a $32 million total cost of the school. If our current projects were in the $32 million range, we might be able to continue to do it the Burlington way and squeeze it into the operating budget that way. But I think the catastrophic price increases that we've seen over the past few years of the pandemic have really impacted things quite a bit too, so obviously. But again, the concept of holding it outside of the operating budget is how every community does it through the debt exclusion process. So I just don't want everyone to feel like we're going over a cliff here. This is very, very normal in terms of how communities finance these projects.
Right, and I think that's a fair point, and I think one of the things that I hopefully talked John into at the last meeting was at town meeting, one of you will stand up and basically describe exactly that, and the fact that we have 3 or 4 projects that are in this range coming up, and we can decide not to invest in them, or we can decide to do a debt exclusion because they aren't going to fit. So getting people used to that possibility, at least, would be a good thing. So the town isn't blindsided by it, I think would be very helpful. Ed?
Yes, thank you. To Paul, I want to maybe tie 2 ideas you just stated together. And I'll admit, I opened up the Prop 2.5 primer on mass.gov for those listening at home who want to understand, and I have to look at the bar chart to understand this and refresh every time. But you're talking about the rates of inflation and the fact that it's normal that often people fund a capital project with an override. The levy limit is going up by 2.5%, right? So when you
2.5 plus new growth.
Plus new growth. But new growth is variable and locally dependent. But when inflation is near 10% for a year or two, but Prop 2.5 is limiting us at 2.5%, I would assume it's actually much more likely right about now that communities are going to have to do debt exclusions to fund projects like this. So I don't know if that's going to make anyone feel any better. Everyone else is doing it, but
I think, Ed, just to be honest, I think most communities have funded them this way for many years.
Yes.
Yeah, we're one of a handful of communities that have excess capacity existing, so we're in a very unique situation, and I think that makes us budgeting things a little bit more difficult sometimes, because, just people get accustomed to everything just sort of being tossed in there.
Gotcha.
And again, so I think every other community's been funding with debt exclusion for many years now, so. I know you had another point too.
that's enough. I mean, I think that's a story we have to tell and really get ahead of it, because if this becomes necessary, it's going to be a bit of it's going to grate against the culture a bit.
Give John a chance.
I just want to add to something that Ed said, that when I first started, these projects were in the debt plan and could fit because the numbers were much smaller. But now we're talking about $100 million building, $40 million building, and that's what Paul was talking about, that people that build $40 million projects have to go to debt exclusion. We were lucky enough that we built 2 DPW buildings and a fire station, and we're planning on doing those other projects at those prices that used to be in our debt plan with the proper spacing and pacing.
You like that, huh?
I do, I love it. I've used it.
That's a keeper.
So I just wanted to, make that point that we knew about these projects, we've been planning for them, but the unprecedented cost increases have just made it unattainable for us to stay in with our 2.5 when the prices have gone up 100%.
Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I agree with where all of you were going, okay? I have no issue at all with times of change. We need to educate. We need to use these tools in order to protect the operating budget, actually. I just want some clarification to make sure, at least for me, let's just talk about the exclusion. So with the exclusion, for a specific project, the borrowing for that project gets excluded from the calculation of what you can increase your levy. Am I correct?
Correct.
Right. So if you go to your top couple of lines here, debt service is a percent of budget, and debt service is a percent of levy. Assuming an exclusion is in place, and I've added a project, but the dollars for that project still turn up in the budget, right? So the percent of the budget needs to go up in order to support these projects. It has to be more than what it's been historically. We've been operating at, what, 5%? Well, wait, I got it right in front of me here, 5.2, right? So we have to operate at a higher percentage in order to do any of these projects, even with the exclusion.
So Frank, something I would just sort of add in, the way it kind of works is we have a new debt expenditure on the expense side of the budget. Let's just say we have a debt payment of $3 million, and then we have a corresponding revenue, additional revenue of $3
Funding
million
mechanism.
on the property tax side of things. So it's a net zero effect from the actual project. But again, the cost of everything is going up, so the
So
budget's still
you're
going
saying the
up.
property that we're building...
So if we have a debt payment of $3 million in a year and it was excluded for debt, we're allowed to add $3 million onto
Okay.
the tax levy revenue size to sort of make it neutral to the budget.
Because of the value of the property we're building into the system.
No, he's just saying the levy limit is increased by the override, by the exclusion amount.
So Frank, on our projection,
I see, but the percent of your budget, though, still has to go up.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes.
it's going to be included in the levy. So the
Yeah.
projection says levy limit 2.5, new growth, below it, any excluded debt, new levy limit.
Okay,
And your
so-
revenue is going to
so for
increase too, because
everybody-
there'll be a funding mechanism.
What we have to get used to is, if we need to make improvements in the town. We need to. That's the fact of life. And in order to do that at a pace that's a little faster than what we've been doing, we've been picking it up for the past 5 years probably. The pace has picked up, right? Fire station, DPW, Mill Pond,
Oh, we can go
PFAS.
further than that.
Go
I mean,
further, right. But-
Memorial, middle school.
Yeah, but we're going to pick it up a little bit more. But the costs are also ratcheting way up. So the percent, what we need to raise to pay for this has got to go up. And therefore, and the debt as a percent of the budget will probably rise quite a bit too, even though that's what's driving the budget up. See what I'm saying? So people have to accept that, and we're not doing anything wrong.
No.
We're simply paying our bills, and we're building things that we've elected to build. And I think that's the start. And the debt exclusion, in my thinking, the debt exclusion is, it's protection. You're just taking advantage of something that allows you to not get tied up in ripping up your operating budget just because you had to raise more money.
Agreed.
It's a tool the town has to use to
Right.
protect services.
Right. And I think that's the long and the short of it.
Did you have something?
Yeah, I also think that it's really critical, and I think maybe you said it too, Ed, that there's an education process that has to happen with debt exclusion. I think people don't necessarily completely understand.
Can't blame them. I'm still
Right?
figuring it out.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, as the debt decreases, the fee
It's dollar for
decreases.
dollar.
It's dollar for dollar. So the beauty of a debt exclusion, if we want to see the upside of it, is when a debt is paid off, that tax goes away. It kind of, it alleviates once it's paid off. So I think it really is about an education process for people, because I do believe that it's critical to continue to do improvements for the community, but I think it's been said that you have to have a different mechanism of paying other than within. And numbers like this, even though I know they're not all filled in, and it's still a little, for those of us who've always gotten used to seeing the levy being higher, right? It gets a little nerve-wracking as you see it lower. So it really is a great tool to start to share with town meeting and people that not this one with blanks, I mean just in general, that it's important for them to understand that and important for them to know that a debt exclusion is really not a bad thing because it's really dollar for dollar and it's a revenue source to get rid of a debt. The education of it.
Another way to look at that is that if you, without the debt exclusion, in terms of the budget, you have to trade off building the new building
Right.
or continuing services. With the debt exclusion, you sort of get both. In both situations, you're getting more for your tax dollars. There are more tax dollars, but you're not have to trade off services versus a capital project.
Correct.
Cheyenne?
I think the town website is an FAQ on all this. Ask questions section. I'm sure more questions will come up out of it, but at least some of the base questions that myself and other member of town meeting might have,
Yeah.
kind of get a sort of grasp on this before they
Yeah, I think the discussion at town meeting, the preview there will be a good socialization activity to get people thinking about it.
Yeah.
I think there's obviously tax increases associated with all these large projects, and there's, varying levels of enthusiasm for that.
That's a good way to say it. Okay.
Well, I don't think anybody's enthusiastic about tax increases.
Yes.
But there are projects that we need, and different people view the need differently, but
Maybe for Town Hall 1, there's probably nothing, we're not going to, this has nothing to do with the town meeting coming up, I don't think. What we'll do is maybe continue to work on this with you guys when you're ready, and maybe we can fold in capital budget as soon as they're ready, and, spend some more time getting this cleaner and fuller.
Yep.
Go from there.
Doug?
Yeah, I'd like to point out for everybody else's benefit, I think it's a real positive. Town Hall 1 has really been meeting with the chairman of the Capital Budget Committee, and I'm not sure that that's been something that's happened often in the past. So it was good that Mark Woods came, and it's good to get those two groups working together on this, because I think it's going to help.
After this, we may never see him again.
We may have chased him right off for another 20 years. But, no, it's good to have that committee folded into this. I think it's critical, and it's been something that's been missing, and very much appreciated.
Okay, well, I'll give everyone the homework of, looking this over, and send me any ideas you have, and we'll get Town Hall 1 and see if we can fold it in, as long as we can not make the font too small and have it fit on one page still. Okay.
And I just want to thank John Paul for this work and everyone else who's jumped on this, and the Capital Budget Committee. It's great to get
That's
more people together.
Dr. Link the pages right over there.
All right. Our final item is approving the minutes from July 12th.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, John Paul.
Thank you.
I'll drop you an email.
when did you send those around?
Excuse me?
Back in July,
Been a
When
little
did you
while
send
ago.
those minutes around?
I sent them back in about a month ago, and I also sent them again recently with the meeting notice.
There were
Not the most recent.
two attachments, the meeting notice and the minutes,
Yeah.
but there was no change to the minutes.
I
there
think
wasn't
if you-
change.
If you go back just a couple emails from me, you'll have it. Just to refresh your memory, that was, we did end-of-year transfers and our reorganization votes, so there wasn't, it wasn't a long meeting. Yeah.
Yep. I remember that meeting. Move to approve.
Second.
Excellent, thank you. That's what I like to hear.
Second.
Any further discussion on that?
Please take
Very
a vote.
good. All right. David? Yes. Sonia?
Abstain.
Oops. Roger?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Frank?
Yes.
Doug?
Yes.
Chris Campbell?
Yes.
Cheyenne? Abstain. And, oh, where did that go? You tricked me with that vote. Chair votes yes, that's 902. Anything else for tonight?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All right, we are adjourned.
So
I believe our next meeting will probably be in preparation for January town meeting unless something